penetrating magic.
The world-renowned troubadour Bob Dylan has been through a lot of ups and downs in his life. He has been around for 8 decades, and today he became 82 years old. Nevertheless, his supporters are devastated by the numerous scars he has carried in his spirit. Watch this video with us to find out about his utterly miserable existence. A challenging and complex part of Bob Dylan's life has been his love relationships. Echo Strom, whose real name is Echo Hellstrom, dated Dylan back in high school. Together, they would listen to faraway highway radio stations playing rhythm and blues, a genre that they both loved. Dylan was exposed to a variety of performers and folk music materials by her family. Though it has never been proven, some have speculated that Dylan's song Girl from the North Country was inspired by Echo Hellstrom. The first significant relationship that Dylan had was with Suze Ralston. They crossed paths while Dylan was just starting out in the music industry. They were together for a long time, and their romance is often mentioned in his early love songs like Don't Think Twice, It's All Right. Their iconic portrait together, which is on the cover of his album The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, is another common association. In 1964, their romance came to an end. Dylan had a substantial love and musical connection with Joan Baez, who was recognized as the queen of folk at the time. Their partnership started in the early 60s and culminated in a 1963 performance at the Newport Folk Festival. While they remained musically involved throughout the years, their romantic engagement began to wane by 1965, as seen in the film Don't Look Back. In 1965, Sarah Dillon tied the knot with Sarah Dillon. Their union produced 4 offspring: Jesse Dillon, Anna, Samuel, and Jacob. They took Maria, Sarah's daughter from a previous marriage, into their care as well. Unfortunately, Sarah's marriage to Dylan ended in divorce in 1977. Sarah had a role in Dylan's film Ronaldo and Clara. They spent a lot of time together in the 60s, and Sarah Dillon is the mother of several of Dylan's children. In 1986, Desiree Gabrielle Dennis Dillon was born to him and Carolyn Dennis, who had previously been his backup vocalist. Their marriage remained a well-kept secret until Howard Soon's memoir was published in 2001, but in 1992 they filed for a divorce. The sexual relationships that Bob Dylan had throughout his life had a profound impact on his music, both lyrically and sonically. His music frequently mirrors the feelings and experiences of his relationships, which has sparked curiosity and conjecture about his private life. Point Dume is a notable and attractive peninsula on the coast of Malibu, California, where Bob Dylan is known to make his primary house while he is not on tour. Point Dume is a popular and exclusive destination for those in search of peace and beauty due to its breathtaking coastline views, rocky cliffs, and lovely beaches. Bob Dylan has properties all across the globe, including his home at Point Dume. It appears that he has amassed a diverse portfolio of real estate properties in many parts of the world, either for his own use or as a means of diversifying his investments. Although Point Dume in Malibu seems to have a particular place in his heart, his real estate portfolio encompasses homes all around the globe, showcasing his diverse lifestyle and extensive financial holdings. Bob Dylan's spirituality and religious views have changed throughout the years, from his Jewish background to his time as a Christian convert, and finally to a more eclectic and individualistic spiritual perspective. His life and religious journey have led him through several stages. Dylan grew up in Hibbing, Minnesota, a tiny town with a tight-knit Jewish culture. In May 1954, he celebrated his bar mitzvah, which revealed his commitment to Judaism. But when Dylan traveled to Israel and met Rabbi Meir Kahane, the founder of the militant Jewish organization, the Jewish Defense League, around his 30th birthday in 1971, his spiritual journey took a new path. Converting to Christianity in the late 1970s was a watershed moment in Dylan's religious journey. His companion Mary Alice Artis had a pivotal role in this metamorphosis by inviting him to the Vineyard School of Discipleship to their house. After receiving ministry from Vineyard pastors like Ken Gullickson, he decided to embrace Christ as his personal Savior. From January through March of 1979, Dylan enriched his Christian understanding by participating in Vineyard's Bible study seminars in Rancho Mirage, California. But Dylan started to separate himself from the born-again title in 1984, saying he'd never used the term and that it was a media creation. He seemed to have a more individual and less dogmatic view of faith when he spoke of his faith in a higher power and the thought that there is more to existence than meets the eye. In an interview he gave to Newsweek in 1997, he discussed spirituality and religion from his point of view, highlighting the philosophical and religious undertones in his music. According to him, his musical compositions, such "Let Me Rest on a Peaceful Mountain" and "I Saw the Light," were his way of expressing his faith. He abandoned religious leaders in favor of his own music as a source of personal revelation and direction. Dylan has stayed connected to his Jewish ancestry, even though his beliefs have changed. He has been an outspoken supporter of the Chabad Lubavitch organization, attending Jewish religious ceremonies including his son's bar mitzvah, and even working as a teacher at the yeshiva Hadar Hader. In 1989 and 1991, he even made an appearance on the Chabad TV show. Dylan has maintained a concert schedule that includes songs from his gospel albums as well as covers of traditional religious music throughout his career. From time to time, he has brought up his religious beliefs, such as his trust in a higher force and the concept that one must be truthful either to themselves or to God. By reading the Bible, meditating, praying, and lighting candles at church, Dylan reinforced his complicated theological worldview in a December 2022 interview with the Wall Street Journal. A believer in eternal punishment, redemption, and predestination, he finds his faith in the Bible and other sacred writings, such as the Psalms, the Invocation of the Saints, and the 5 Books of Moses. Robert Allen Zimmerman, better known as Bob Dylan, came into this world on May 24, 1941, in Duluth, Minnesota's St. Mary's Hospital. His childhood home was the Minnesota town of Hibbing, which lies on the Mesabi Range about west of Lake Superior. From many walks of life, Dylan's family was eclectic. His grandparents on his father's side, Zygmunt Zimmerman and Anna Kiss, had fled the pogroms that befell the Jewish population of Odessa, in what is now Ukraine, and sought refuge in America. Florence and Ben Stone, his maternal grandparents, were Jewish immigrants to the U.S. from Lithuania, who came in 1902. Dylan said in his book Chronicles Volume 1-inch that the Kauman district in Kars province in northern Turkey was the ancestral home of his paternal grandmother's family. Beatrice Stone and Abram Zimmerman were members of a tight-knit Jewish community. They were Dylan's parents. Duluth was their primary residence up until Dylan was 6 years old. Unfortunately, his father's polio diagnosis forced them to relocate to Hibbing. With the active involvement of Dylan's father and paternal uncles, the family ran a furniture and appliance store in Hibbing. As a young boy, Dylan listened intently to the radio, which sparked an intense interest in music. He grew up listening to Shreveport, Louisiana's blues and country stations, but by the time he was a teenager, rock and roll had captured his heart. Dylan was a member of many bands throughout his time at Hibbing High School. He was a member of the Golden Chords, one of these bands, and they covered songs by Elvis Presley and Little Richard. The administrator had to cut the microphone because their performance of Rock and Roll Is Here to Stay by Danny and the Juniors during a high school talent event was too loud. Dylan was listed as Robert Zimmerman in his 1959 high school yearbook. Dylan relocated to Minneapolis and enrolled at the University of Minnesota in September 1959, following his high school graduation. At first, he was more into rock and roll, but eventually he started to like American folk music. In an interview he gave in 1985, he discussed this shift by saying that folk music was able to accommodate darker and more introspective topics, such as hopelessness, melancholy, victory, trust in the supernatural, and other profound feelings. Dylan resided in the Sigma Alpha Mu fraternity house in Minneapolis, which was home to a sizable Jewish community. Near the university campus, in a coffee shop called the 10 O'Clock Scholar, he started performing. Dylan immersed himself in the folk music culture of the little town. At this time, he began performing under the moniker Bob Dylan. He thought about using the surname Dylan at first, but after reading Dylan Thomas's poems, he settled on it. An interview Dylan gave in 2004 provided the explanation for his name change. He said, "You're born, the wrong name, names of wrong parents, that happens. You call yourself what you want to call yourself. This is the land of the free." Bob Dylan took the bold choice to leave college in May of 1960, having finished his first year. The road to stardom as a musician and composer was only beginning for him. He made a historic journey to New York City in January 1961 to see his musical hero Woody Guthrie and play live. Unfortunately, Guthrie was a patient in Greystone Park Psychiatric Hospital due to his Huntington's illness. According to Dylan, Woody Guthrie was the genuine voice of the American spirit. Dylan was adamant about becoming Guthrie's greatest pupil because of the impact Guthrie had on Dylan's early performances. While in New York, Dylan became acquainted with Guthrie and his disciple Ramblin' Jack Elliott, who continued Guthrie's musical heritage and spent time with Guthrie himself. For Dylan, this time in New York was a watershed moment in his career. The month of February 1961 marked the beginning of Dylan's residency at Greenwich Village nightclubs. He became deeply involved with the folk music community, where he met and became friends with artists such as Odetta, Dave Van Ronk, Fred Neil, and the New Lost City Ramblers. He also learned from Irish musicians like Tommy Makem and the Clancy Brothers. For a while, Dylan's abilities were acknowledged. At Gertie's Folk City that September, Dylan was praised by reviewer Robert Shelton of the New York Times as Bob Dylan, a distinctive folk song stylist. This review was pivotal in promoting Dylan's rising stardom. Simultaneously, folk singer Carolyn Hester persuaded Dylan to participate on her third album after becoming captivated by his harmonica talents. Thanks to this chance meeting, Dylan met producer John Hammond, who went on to sign Dylan to Columbia Records. Bob Dylan, Dylan's self-titled first album, came out on March 19, 1962. With only 2 original compositions, the CD showcased a blend of classic folk, blues, and gospel tunes. It was a major turning point in his career, even though it only sold 5,000 copies in its first year. The 2 most important things that happened to Bob Dylan in August 1962 were signing a management deal with Albert Grossman, who would stay with him until 1970, and formally changing his name to Bob Dylan. At this time, tensions were rising between Grossman and John Hammond, which prompted someone to propose that Dylan work with young black jazz producer Tom Wilson. It was the start of a fruitful collaboration when Wilson produced many tunes for Dylan's second album without receiving official credit. From December 1962 to January 1963, Dylan traveled to the UK as part of his creative journey. He was invited to star in a Philip Saville-directed BBC television drama. The show concluded with Dylan's performance of "Blowin' in the Wind," which was among the earliest public renditions of the landmark song. While in London, Dylan studied songs from British musicians like Martin Carthy and played at several folk clubs. Dylan had already solidified his position as a rising star in the music industry by the time his second album, The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, was released in May 1963. Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger's love of politically charged music were major influences on the album's many protest songs. One of Dylan's earliest singles, Mixed Up Confusion, was issued in December 1962. It highlighted his adventurous spirit and rockabilly sound experiments. Bob Dylan's departure from The Ed Sullivan Show in May 1963 brought his political involvement to the forefront. Dylan was warned by CBS Television's chief of program procedures during preparations that his song Talkin' John Birch Paranoid Blues may be deemed defamatory to the John Birch Society. Dylan took a daring choice by declining to be on the show rather than comply with the censoring request. Dylan and Joan Baez were both well-known civil rights movement personalities by this point. They were so close that they sang together on August 28, 1963, at the historic March on Washington. As Dylan became more politically involved, his third album, The Times They Are A-Changin', mirrored this. Many of the tracks on the CD dealt with very current political and social topics, while Only a Pawn in Their Game focused on the assassination of civil rights leader Medgar Evers. The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll delves into the murder of Hattie Carroll, a black hotel maid, by William Zanzinger, a young white socialite. Some of the album's tracks, such North Country Blues and Ballad of Hollis Brown, portrayed the hopelessness felt by communities who relied on farming and mining for their livelihood. In addition to these political songs, there were two more that dealt with love, Boots of Spanish Leather and One Too Many Mornings. An amusing London reporter once said that Dylan wore a garment so loud it would turn off the neon lights in Leicester Square, and had hair that would make a comb's teeth gnash. Interactions between Dylan and interviewers were increasingly heated. As a trademark witticism, he quipped, "No, I play my mother." This came after he had hinted at filming a cowboy horror flick and had been asked whether he would be playing the cowboy in the film. Bringing It All Back Home, Bob Dylan's album released in March 1965, signaled yet another major change in his musical approach. Under Tom Wilson's supervision, this album showcased his initial forays into electric instrumentation, marking a significant shift from his earlier folk style. There was an acoustic side to the record and an electric side, making it a double LP. Subterranean Homesick Blues, the album's lead single, was influenced by Chuck Berry's Too Much Monkey Business. The song's lyrics were characterized by a free association style that was evocative of beat poetry, and perhaps even a forerunner to rap and hip-hop. The song's early music video used Dylan's now iconic technique of using cue cards with the song's important lyrics, an idea that Dylan is said to have come up with himself. The use of cue cards became standard in later music videos and commercials. The other side of Bringing It All Back Home had Dylan go back to his acoustic guitar and harmonica playing ways with 4 lengthy tracks. Many folk music fans were looking forward to Bob Dylan's performance at the Newport Folk Festival in the summer of 1965. Since this was Dylan's first electric show since high school, it marked a turning point in his career. Mike Bloomfield played guitar, and Al Cooper played organ in his backing band. Dylan had played Newport twice before, in 1963 and 1964, but the crowd was more mixed when he visited in 1965. Many theories attempt to explain the audience's reaction. Critics have pointed fingers at poor sound quality and a brief set as the reasons why folk aficionados weren't happy with Dylan's surprising use of an electric guitar. There was a major backlash within the folk music elite after Dylan's electric performance at Newport, for whatever reason. Famous folk singer Jan McLee wrote an article criticizing Dylan's change for Sing Out in September magazine, insulting Dylan's music as 10th-rate drivel and saying that only a naive audience could accept such a shift. Days after his Newport performance on July 29, 1965, Dylan recorded Positively 4th Street. The lyrics, which were filled with paranoia and themes of retribution, have been taken as Dylan's reaction to criticism and a slur against his former acquaintances and friends from the folk scene in New York City, where he had played in clubs along West 4th Street. An important event in Bob Dylan's life happened on July 29, 1966, when he wrecked his Triumph Tiger 100 motorbike near his home in Woodstock, New York. Dylan said that he had fractured many cervical vertebrae in the collision. Nevertheless, the details surrounding the accident are still shrouded in mystery. Many thoughts and speculations have been generated regarding the occurrence since no ambulance was dispatched and Dylan was not taken to the hospital. Dylan, according to his biographers, was able to escape the crushing demands of his profession after his motorbike accident. After Dylan had fully healed, he shifted his focus to editing a documentary film on Pennebaker's 1966 trip. However, ABC Television rejected the first edit of the film because they thought it would be too complicated for the average viewer. Dylan took a break from the spotlight in 1967 to record more than 100 songs at his Woodstock house and the basement of Big Pink, a neighboring house where the Hawks, later the band, lived. Some of these songs became hits when they were recorded by Julie Driscoll, The Byrds, and Manfred Mann, but they were originally meant to be demos for other artists to record. In 1975, Columbia Records published a selection of these recordings as The Basement Tapes. However, it wasn't until 2014 that the extra tracks recorded by Dylan and his band in 1967 were finally released as The Basement Tapes Complete. At the latter half of 1967, Dylan went back to Nashville to record at a studio with Kenny Buttrey on drums, Pete Drake on steel guitar, and Charlie McCoy on bass. Ultimately, they recorded a collection of brief songs titled John Wesley Harding, which drew inspiration from biblical themes in the American West. Lyrics and instrumental arrangements on this album were spare, reflecting Dylan's in-depth study of the Judeo-Christian heritage. It featured the musical number All Along the Watchtower. Dylan lost his mentor and early inspiration, Woody Guthrie, in October 1967. At a tribute event at Carnegie Hall on January 20, 1968, Dylan performed live for the first time in over 20 months, with the band as his backing. Listeners hearing Dylan's Nashville Skyline, 1969, his subsequent album, heard a more subdued Dylan as he collaborated with Nashville musicians. Album highlights included a Johnny Cash duet and the smash song Lay Lady Lay. Dylan's vocal approach took a radical turn on this album. Bob Dylan was definitely doing something that can be called singing, according to Variety magazine, who also said that Dylan has managed to add an octave to his range. In May 1969, Dylan made an appearance on Johnny Cash's first television show, singing a duet with Cash of Girl from the North Country. Dylan also sang solos of Living the Blues and I Threw It All Away. Later that year, on August 31, 1969, Dylan traveled to England to headline the Isle of Wight Festival after turning down invitations to appear at the nearby Woodstock Festival. On his YouTube page in March 2020, Bob Dylan dropped a 17-minute song titled Murder Most Foul that centered about the death of President John F. Kennedy. He achieved his first #1 single under his own name when it rocketed to the top of the Billboard Rock digital song sales list. He then announced the release of 2 additional singles, I Contain Multitudes and False Prophet, both of which will be featured on a future double album not long after. Rough and Rowdy Ways, Bob Dylan's 39th studio album and his first original material album since 2012, was released on June 19, 2020. In its first week of release, the album topped the UK album chart and garnered positive reviews, becoming Dylan the oldest artist to do so with new original material. His complete song collection, including full rights and ownership of each song's copyright, was sold to Universal Music Publishing Group in December 2020 for a hefty price estimated at over $300 million, making headlines at the time. In May of 2021, in honor of his 80th birthday, Dylan hosted a virtual conference titled Dylan Zero, where academics, journalists, and artists all shared their insights. The commemoration saw the publication of several new biographies and studies of Dylan. A 50-minute live stream performance of Shadow Kingdom, the early songs of Bob Dylan, was broadcast by him in July 2021, and it was a success. In June 2023, the music to the concert was subsequently made public. Springtime in New York was published by Dylan in September 2021 as part of the Bootleg Series Volume 16, 1980-1985. This collection includes alternate takes, live recordings, outtakes, rehearsals, and different versions of songs from different albums. The innovative recording technology known as Ionic Original was used to auction off a one-of-a-kind version of Bob Dylan's Blowin' in the Wind in July 2022 for a hefty amount. With 66 pieces focusing on music from different artists, Dylan's The Philosophy of Modern Song was published in November 2022, and garnered attention for its interesting substance and diverse viewpoint. Various forms of Dylan's bootleg series Volume 17, Fragments, Time Out of Mind Sessions, 1996 to 1997, were made available on January 27, 2023. This collection has live performances, outtakes, and a remix of the 1997 album, among other things. Is Bob Dylan's life something you can get behind? Feel free to share your thoughts in the space provided. Hopefully, you have found this movie to be useful. Please show your appreciation by subscribing, leaving a like, and sharing the video. See you in the upcoming videos. Thank you for tuning in.